That's a 10. That's a good one. Yeah.
Car prices will continue to rise, and this comes as no surprise. But what if I told you that behind this trend lies not just a price increase, but a whole chain of events that could change the US automotive market for years to come? Ford, Hyundai, and other global automotive giants are all under pressure. Every price increase is a step into a new, unstable world where buyers can no longer be sure that prices won't change at any moment. And these aren't just numbers on a board. They are the result of economic wars, tariffs, and changes in global logistics that are reshaping the market in their own way, forcing buyers to choose between buying today and risking paying more next month.
And police in Italy are investigating possible arson after a fire destroyed more than a dozen Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk is calling the incident at a Rome dealership terrorism. This comes as Tesla has been the target of recent protests around the world.
Have you ever wondered what goes on behind the scenes when trade wars and tariffs become more than just news headlines, but a real threat to your wallet? 25% tariffs on imported cars and parts are not only causing traffic jams, but also huge problems at the factories where the most popular models are manufactured. Manufacturers are not only forced to raise prices, but also to change their strategy in the US market by investing in new capacity or trying to get rid of excess inventory. And what is the response to all this? Only higher prices for cars, new, used, and even those that have not yet rolled off the assembly line.
There's been a lot of on and off, some inconsistency.
There's no inconsistency. I'm not like a block that just, I won't delay. It's called flexibility. It's not called inconsistency. It's called flexibility.
But the most interesting part is yet to come. If you think that price increases are just a short-term problem, you are mistaken. The economic consequences of these tariffs could drag on for months or even years. Dealers, car manufacturers, and buyers will find themselves in a vicious circle. Some cannot sell their goods, while others cannot afford to buy them. Consumed by production costs, car manufacturers will look for ways to minimize losses, but in the end, these efforts will fall on the shoulders of ordinary buyers. The example of new cars, whose average price tag has already exceeded $48,000, 0 cents, is not an extreme measure, but the result of economic realities in which we are all victims.
After weeks of whiplash, Trump threatening tariffs, imposing some and walking back others, many Americans are feeling the uncertainty. In Swisher, Iowa, distillery owner Jeff Quint says it's paralyzing.
The bourbon industry is going to be collateral damage in this tariff war. I don't really think there's any way around that.
And he's not alone. Tonight, the majority of Americans, 61%, now say they disapprove of how the president is handling tariffs. 56% say they disapprove of his handling of the economy overall. But the president has dismissed those concerns tonight, saying he has the right to change course.
Why is this important for each of us? Because all these processes are not just statistics. They are changing the market, which we as consumers have come to regard as dynamic and fluid. How many of us will put off buying a car for fear of further price hikes? How many families will be faced with the choice of paying now or waiting for conditions to become more favorable? And what if these massive price increases don't end this time? This video will reveal how Trump's trade strategy and the growing economic crisis in the automotive industry are affecting our market. Expect unexpected facts and conclusions that may make you look at the US automotive market in a different light. New car prices continue to rise, causing concern for millions of buyers. But why is this happening? It's not just economic factors at play, but changes happening at a deeper level. In recent years, the US car market has undergone a series of shocks, with trade conflicts, the introduction of new tariffs, and economic measures aimed at changing global logistics being the main drivers of these changes. These are not just problems for car manufacturers, they are real threats to anyone who wants to buy or sell a car. And the strangest thing is that the price increases were only the beginning of this wave. Manufacturers such as Ford and Hyundai began raising prices for their cars, causing a wave of concern among buyers. Their decisions to raise prices signaled that the market situation was essentially spiraling out of control. But this is not just a price increase of a few $1,000s, it is a real jump that has shaken the automotive industry and caused serious changes in consumer preferences. Supply problems, increased production costs, and tax implications have been the catalysts for this process.
US President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the country. It's due to come into effect on April 2nd. Economists and world leaders are warning that it will be a tax on consumers and have a chilling effect on the global economy. But to Americans, Trump paints a rosy picture, predicting that the levies will spur growth.
When tariffs on imported cars increase, it is not just a matter of additional costs for manufacturers. The entire production structure changes. First, the tariff increase forces manufacturers to look for alternative ways to reduce costs. This means that they have to review their supply chains and reduce the number of models they can produce. Ultimately, this leads to shortages. Lower production volumes inevitably lead to a reduction in supply, and in a context of growing demand, this leads to higher prices. At the same time, it should not be forgotten that price increases are also strongly influenced by logistics problems arising from trade wars between the US and other countries. When companies lose access to cheap supplies due to tariff barriers, they are forced to look for more expensive options, which is reflected in the final cost of the car. In recent months, production costs have increased by tens of billions of dollars, and in the end, this always falls on the shoulders of consumers. This all leads to car manufacturers sharply raising prices for new models. For example, in April 2025, the average price of a new car in the US exceeded $48,000, 0 cents. This is a record high, and it is possible that we will see even higher prices in the future, putting buyers in an extremely uncomfortable position. But it's not just about rising car prices, it's also a change in the entire structure of supply and demand in the automotive market. In response to higher tariffs and rising prices, consumers are beginning to change their preferences. Many people who had previously planned to buy new cars are now postponing their purchase.
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
Instead of buying a new car, they are looking for cheaper alternatives, such as used cars. But this raises another problem. Rising prices for new cars are beginning to affect the used car market. The average price of used cars has risen to $29,000, 0 cents, making them unaffordable for most consumers. Against this backdrop, dealers are facing great difficulties as buyers start looking for ways to minimize costs. In these conditions, competition for affordable cars is becoming even more intense. One of the factors fueling competition in the market is the continuing shortage of cars. But the market situation is not as simple as it seems. Price increases by major automakers such as Ford, Hyundai, and General Motors have made the market extremely volatile. Consumers faced with the choice of buying now or waiting often find themselves in a difficult position. Even if they decide to wait, it is unclear when the market situation will improve. This creates uncertainty that affects the entire market. However, it is not only changes in production and supply chains that are driving prices up. Existing tariffs on imported cars and parts also play an important role in the changing price situation. New duties introduced in 2025 have led to huge costs for manufacturers. Instead of looking for ways to reduce production costs, they are facing even greater financial burdens. This, in turn, is forcing them to raise car prices, passing on the costs to the end consumer. Some automakers, such as Ford, have already decided to raise prices on cars manufactured in Mexico to offset rising import tariffs. This decision has once again made it difficult for American citizens to buy cars, as they are facing sharp price increases. Moreover, the price increases are not only due to higher tariffs. The impact of these changes on the entire automotive market will be felt for a long time to come, as even models assembled in the US still contain components manufactured abroad. This means that ultimately, every car that rolls off an American assembly line will still be affected by tariffs and the external economic situation.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States. Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe.
The rise in prices for new cars has had a serious impact not only on manufacturers, but also on buyers themselves. In April 2025, new car prices in the U.S. rose by 2.5%, which was a significant blow to the average American's wallet. The average cost of a new car exceeded $48,000, 0 cents, a record high in history. This has created a new reality for consumers, who are now forced to choose between buying a car at a high price or waiting for conditions to improve in the future. But there is another problem lurking here. The economic instability created by trade wars and tariffs means that the future of the market remains uncertain. Even if buyers decide to postpone their purchase, they cannot be sure that the market situation will be more favorable in the future. This factor further exacerbates uncertainty, forcing consumers to make difficult decisions. The problem is not limited to rising prices. Maintaining such high car prices is caused by another serious problem: shortages. The number of new cars available for sale has decreased significantly. Car manufacturers, faced with rising production costs and logistical difficulties, have been forced to limit production. This, in turn, has created a shortage in the market, which has also affected prices. The average age of used cars continues to increase and their prices continue to rise. This makes it difficult to find affordable cars for those who are not ready or cannot afford a new car. As a result, many buyers are looking for alternative ways to purchase cars, including choosing used models. But here too, a problem arises. Prices for used cars have also risen sharply. The average cost of a used car is now $29,000, 0 cents, which is 15% more than a year ago. This makes buying a used car also unaffordable for many Americans.
Ready? The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many, as you know, that will take many years.
In fact, I'll tell you, there's another theory is that the tariff, you make it so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. When I do the 10%, 10% is really, first of all, 10%, when you collect it, is hundreds of billions of dollars. The numbers that you're talking, all reducing our deficit. But really, so there's two ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies. Now, if you want the companies to come in.
The impact of tariffs on the automotive market is not limited to price changes. Tariffs on imported cars introduced in 2025 continue to have a significant impact on manufacturers and consumers. The 25% duties on cars and parts are becoming a heavy burden for automakers, who are forced to pass on their costs to the end consumer. As a result, the price of each car is inevitably rising. Major manufacturers such as Ford have already raised prices for their cars produced in Mexico, which is also leading to higher prices for cars entering the US. However, this is not the only factor affecting prices. Supply chain disruptions caused by both tariffs and global economic issues such as the pandemic and supply chain disruptions are affecting the number of cars available. All of these factors are interrelated, resulting in growing market instability. Many automakers, such as Hyundai and General Motors, are being forced to rethink their production strategies in an effort to minimize losses. Logistical challenges and sharp increases in production costs are forcing them to take measures aimed at reducing their dependence on imports and increasing domestic production. Hyundai, for example, is actively expanding its capacity in the US to reduce import costs and lessen the impact of tariffs on the price of its cars. However, despite these efforts, car makers are facing a market that remains unstable and limited availability of cars. In the future, this situation could only worsen if tariffs remain high. This means that buyers will be forced to face even higher prices, and dealers will face limited supplies.
I think you're going to remember today, it's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country.
Trump's trade strategy, focused on stimulating domestic production, is not yielding quick results. Despite increased domestic production and the shift of many automakers to localization, the price situation remains unstable. Import tariffs continue to have an impact, and production remains under pressure from higher costs. Just a few months after the tariffs were introduced, car production began to decline, and the number of models available on the market fell. This has put additional pressure on dealers who are unable to meet growing demand, which has also contributed to price increases. In the future, automakers may be forced to raise prices even further to offset the costs caused by higher tariffs and supply chain challenges. All of this, in turn, creates economic instability that cannot be overcome by any of the existing strategies aimed at stimulating production.
With Elon Musk's views on weighing into very much national politics, national elections in Europe. And then on top of that, when you see the backdrop of Tesla upgrading its product line and the impact of them trying to chase more sales at the back end of last year, that means it's short on inventory. It can't necessarily sell as many vehicles or doesn't have as many in stock to sell. So there is that issue there of a confluence of impacts, which means that sales have been falling. Again, the question is how much more that will impact into February as well, given that the back end of last year in 2024, Tesla sales did slip overall.
Of course, all these changes in the automotive market are not without consequences for consumers. People faced with a sharp rise in car prices are looking for ways to avoid such costs. More and more people who recently planned to buy a new car are now choosing used cars to save money. But even in this case, an unpleasant surprise awaits them. Prices for used cars, like new ones, continue to rise. Moreover, the shortage of new cars means that buyers are finding it difficult to find the models they want. Thus, the rise in car prices caused by tariffs is changing the market in the short and long term, making car purchases unaffordable for many Americans. The tariffs introduced in 2025 will undoubtedly continue to have a serious impact on the automotive industry. These are not just minor changes, but turning points that are radically changing the market. With each passing month, the consequences are becoming more and more tangible, and automakers are slowly beginning to adapt to the new conditions. However, it is important to note that not all automakers are able to quickly and effectively cope with the challenges posed by the new economic realities. Even companies that were previously considered the most stable are now facing difficulties they have never encountered before. In particular, giants such as General Motors and Toyota are beginning to review their production strategies in an attempt to minimize their dependence on imported components, which in turn is leading to significant financial losses. The realization that even cars assembled in the US contain components manufactured abroad gives us a complete picture of how deeply international relations have affected this sector. This dependence on imports exacerbates the problems caused by tariffs and deprives manufacturers of flexibility in their decision-making. With each passing month, the picture becomes bleaker. Revising production strategies also includes switching to cheaper materials to reduce costs. However, such measures are not usually long-term. The more companies cut production costs, the more restrictions are imposed on the quality of cars. This becomes a problem because buyers begin to notice the deterioration in product quality. Quality issues and market constraints are creating a wave of discontent. At the same time, US government agencies are beginning to tighten controls on the quality of cars imported into the country, which is also putting additional pressure on manufacturers. But despite all the efforts of car manufacturers, the market remains under threat of even more serious changes.